signed on to the Contracting for Equity webinar. And as you have heard, we are recording this, and the slides will be made available. If you registered on email, an email will be sent out to you about how to access the recording and the slides. My name is Crystal Robinson-Justice from BARHII, and I want to make sure that everybody can hear me. So if you're having trouble hearing me, please send a note in the chat box. There should be a little chat box, or I think a fairly obvious chat box, a little circle, thought bubble circle thing. And if you can send a note that if you are having trouble hearing me, that would be great. We're actually just surrounded by marvelousness today. Over 100 people signed up for the webinar, and we have a fabulous crew of presenters. So if something's not working, if there's a bit of a glitch, it's just because the technology or myself, it can't take all of the ultimate fabulous that's happening. And so you just have to, give us a little bit and be gentle with us in this process. I have gotten no notes saying that people can't hear, so I'm assuming that it means that people can hear. If you all can make sure also to mute yourselves on your devices, that would be great. Okay. So to begin, you've joined on for the Contracting for Equity webinar, and it's a webinar jointly hosted by the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, or GARE, and the Bay Area Regional Health Inequities Initiative, BARHII. And once again, I have said that that my name is Crystal Robinson-Justice from BARHII, and the flow of the webinar is that we'll have a brief overview of kind of what Contracting for Equity is, and then we'll get into specific examples from around the country. And I have been really blessed to be able to sit and talk with these women, Nancy Locke from Seattle and Velma Corbell from Minneapolis and Wanda Kirkpatrick from St. Paul, and they are fabulous. And because I'm generous, I have decided that I get to share them with you today. Much of the overview that you'll hear is from an issue brief called Contracting for Equity, written by Tim Lawrence. Sorry, Tim. And that issue brief can be found on GARE's website. You can also check it if you look at your meeting resources section. There should be a link for you later on or now if you want to get that issue brief. Okay, now to move on. So we are all here today really because, across the country, governmental jurisdictions are making a commitment to achieving racial equity and focusing on the power and influence of their own institution and working with partnerships and partnering with others. And when this happens, there can be great and enormous leverage that really sets the stage for the achievement of racial equity in our communities. And today, we're going to really look at how we use that specifically around contracting and procurement. The goals for the webinar today are to gain an understanding of what racial equity looks like in contracting and procurement, and how contracting can be used to move racial equity goals forward. We're going to review how realities for minority and women-owned business enterprises interact with standard contracting processes and can create structural barriers. And we're going to look at some strategies to address these. We're going to begin a discussion of the influence of Prop 209 in our state and how to move forward with racial equity goals within its restrictions. And then we're going to share examples of contracting and procurement policies, practices, and strategies with a racial equity lens. Towards the end, we will be able to have a roundtable and also have time for questions. So inclusive contracting refers to the process of creating the environment for businesses owned by people of color and or women to participate in a governmental procurement and contracting process. Inclusive business participation in local government procurement and contracting is an important source of income and jobs and helps to strengthen the community and business partnership. And it strengthens communities within the jurisdiction, both economically and socially. And our contracting equity goal is just that local and regional government dollars used for contracting, consulting, and procurement should benefit the communities we serve, and it should be proportionate to the demographics in our communities. Okay, and then there are some differences that really lead to structural barriers for us when we are doing our procurement. And so there are differences that minority and women-owned businesses have in access to capital. There are differences in experiences growing up in family businesses. There are differences in their social networks and differences with experiences with overt discrimination or racism. And so minority and women-owned businesses are less likely to own businesses and therefore less likely to participate in our governmental procurement systems. Their businesses are smaller on average. They have fewer assets and more debt. And so they have less money to finance their business and reduced cash flow, which can often be a barrier because our procurement processes are slow to pay and often require a long lag time between actually doing the work and getting paid for it. And then there's the experience growing up in business and family businesses, and so there's less social capital, less knowledge and experience about running a business and just about the governmental and contracting process. And then we have our social networks, and so they tend to have fewer connections or established relationships with prime contractors, so they're less likely to be called upon to actually be subcontractors, and they tend to be less knowledgeable, like I said earlier, about the contracting process. And then there might be overt discrimination or racism, which means that they're in the private marketplace, they might be less able to tap into those relationships with prime contractors. And if they already have a governmental contract, it might be problematic if there are size or time or size restrictions to the program. Okay. And so because minority business enterprises are often less available and have lower rates of utilization, when it comes to contracting and procurement, these factors can become barriers. And then there are critical moments in the life cycle of a business that can become key opportunities for local government to be proactive in addressing these underlying barriers to success. And local governments are especially well positioned to deal with these issues in business development because it is an issue not only of utilization, which is being able to use within the procurement process, but also an issue of availability, whether there are enough businesses that exist in the first place and are able to do the work. And local governments are often also dealing with small business development in the context of neighborhood and economic development. And so they're really able to tackle small business development in two ways. One is both they're able to kind of, as they are helping to develop small business development in low-income neighborhoods, and if they're doing equity in contracting policy, they can reap the benefits from these two different angles. The key moments, as you'll see from the other slide, I have put in the kind of all the ways in which those different social structural factors impact these key moments. We have key moments in getting a contract, and some of the strategies we can do are diversity plans, aspirational subcontracting programs, bid discounts, grading primes, as well as other kind of networking programs and loan programs. There are key moments in getting utilized and getting paid, and the strategies that we can use to kind of balance out the structural factors of the social networks or the overt discrimination is having contract compliant staff that stay throughout the life of a project, to have a transparent, accessible online subcontracting system, quick pay policies, and prime networking. There are key moments in building bonding capacity, in which training, coaching, loan programs all factor in. There is key moments in being able to obtain a larger contract or obtain a prime contract, and these can be helped by small business set-asides or business bid discounts, loan programs, mentor, protege, or coaching, and social networking. And then there's also just being able to transition out of being a minority or minority and women-owned business or a small business program into growing bigger. And this is really helped by social networking, kind of doing some mentor, protege, and some bid discounts. Now, in California, we have Prop 209, and this part of the conversation has been heavily influenced by a presentation that was put on by Stephen Mendian of the Haas Institute for a Fair and Inclusive Study. It was a presentation given to GARE about a month ago. And so Prop 209 states that the state shall not discriminate against or grant preferential treatment to any individual or group on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin in the operation of public employment, public education, or public contracting. And for the purposes of the section, state shall include, but not necessarily be limited to, the state itself, any city, county, and county, public university system, including the University of California, community college district, school district, special district, or any other political subdivision or governmental instrumentality of or within the state. And so that feels very restrictive for being able to be explicit in our racial equity goals in contracting. And it's been compounded by lawsuits. And so there was a lawsuit by the High Voltage Wire Works Incorporated versus the City of San Jose. And the City of San Jose had set up a participation goal for minority business enterprises and women-owned businesses to do the work to be contracted, and to qualify, contractors had to meet or exceed this goal or demonstrate reasonable efforts to obtain participation from minority or women business enterprises. And that was struck down. And so it really asks us to be very creative. And so we'll go on. We have some specific strategies that we'll begin to talk about now. And so kind of what do we do? So our lawyers will tell you what we cannot do, and they can be a resource for us, right, because of the fear of litigation and being sued. So they can be a resource for us, not in helping us figure out what to do, but in running our plans so that we are clear about what we cannot. What I want us to have is an equity plan attitude. And I have up Tim Gunn from Project Runway's Make It Work. His tagline from it is Make It Work. And I really looked at Project Runway as an example because, one, they have specific challenges. I don't know if everybody's familiar with Project Runway, so I will tell you, they have specific challenges, and the challenges are always ridiculous. They're always like, make a high-fashion gown with what you can empty from your waste paper basket, and $100 and, 30 hours. And so they're asked to be creative with challenges and real constraints, both in terms of money and time, which is both what we are being asked to. And in Project Runway, Tim Gunn, who advises them, he'll come in halfway through the time and he'll be like, oh, your idea is rubbish, and people will have to start all over again. And although I have to say I haven't watched every episode, every season, to my knowledge, nobody has sent a model down naked. Like, nobody has sent somebody down naked, and nobody has given up. And that's the kind of attitude, that's the kind of make it work attitude that I think that is our first, our first piece of armor that we have to put on as we are trying to contract for equity. So we have to have be very clear and careful structuring of our goals. We have to do kind of race and gender neutral strategies. In some ways, that means using geography, unfortunately, because we still live in very segregated neighborhoods. Geography can become a substitute for race, and we can have local focus and do local pieces. We can also have a small business strategies, and then we can have targeted marketing, outreach, education, and efforts that are specifically for people of color and women. They just can't have. They just can't provide benefits that are not generally available to all, so that you can have an education system, because we've talked a lot of it about a lot of the barriers about being access to social networks or having access to education. And so we can do things that improves our networking, improves our access, improves our marketing, that strengthens our field, so that we're sending out knowledge about the upcoming policies and things. We can send them out specifically to our minority and women business-owned businesses and things like that. So we can have specific targeted marketing. As we're developing our equity plans, aside from our make it work attitude, we should also look for them to be comprehensive, for it to include the culture change in local government, for them to be capacity building, and also have a focus on expansion, collaboration, and replication. So comprehensive, we want there to be many strategies, multiple strategies in multiple ways. And in all of those strategies, we should, just because we build it once doesn't mean that that's where we keep it. We should be consistently assessing and monitoring so that there can be continual improvement. And that our equity plans for contracting and procurement need to be within a larger racial equity plan and policy, which will also help with that larger culture change in local government. And so that will include training of our different departments and being part of this larger plan, as well as doing a lot of capacity building in terms of small business development, bonding, insurance, and finance, certification, and doing business assistance, and vendor outreach and networking. As we're also building our plans, we should make sure that we're looking at policy, strategy, as well as practice and regulation. And so policy, I wanted to highlight here Seattle Council City Policy. So what they have is that they have, although they are also within a state where they have policies that are similar to our Prop 209, the Seattle Council City Policy has put together an ordinance that said that they want to increase, I believe we've been terminated by mistake, perhaps.
We'll get you right back online really quick.
And forgive, this is one of those glitches we talked about that might happen earlier. And maybe you're having trouble with audio just because I'm hesitating for a moment while everything comes up to being. Do I host join?
Host.
Okay. And we're trying to get it all up. I am sorry. Okay.
then just bring the PowerPoint back up. And
yeah. And, okay. Okay, I am sorry for the delay. I believe that everybody should have the screen back up. Okay, so everybody has the screen back up, and everybody should be able to be hearing me. I believe we are still recording. I don't know quite how that's going to work out towards the end, but it'll be figuring out in a moment. Okay. And so I was talking about that we need, that as we're designing our plans, we should think about including policy strategy as well as practice and regulation. And so the Seattle, and what is interesting about Seattle is the way in which they did the policy with an executive order. So the city council set some policy that was modified by an executive order from the mayor. And so the policy was to the excerpt is the purpose and extent, the purpose and intent are to provide the maximum or practicable opportunity for increased participation by minority and women-owned and controlled businesses, as long as such businesses are underrepresented, and to ensure that the city contracting policies do not support discrimination in employment and services when the city procures public works, goods, and service from the private sector. And the executive order requires departments promptly pay invoices, support businesses by providing technical assistance, and increase accountability and coordination to ensure fair and equitable treatment among all businesses competing from public work, purchasing, and consulting contracts. And so and that is a policy statement that helps us move forward the work, especially when thinking about promptly paying invoices and supporting through technical assistance, without having it be, without having to do mandatory or mandated goals and things, and that we can have race-neutral strategies. And so you can have race-neutral strategies that have embedded aspirational goals that are not specific goals that people have to hit. And these can be part of an inclusion plan that they have to, it's kind of like all the contractors are asked to put forward. And so they're asked to design it among themselves, and that becomes binding when they sign the contract. And so their subcontractors that they put in become binding upon signing the contract rather than doing another step afterwards. There can be good faith efforts required for inclusion, as well as small business set-asides with high thresholds. And the last three are all small business strategies that can be implemented, as well as setting up just some different things for practices and regulation. So within our, so doing multi-jurisdictional certification, so that if somebody becomes certified for being a small business in one jurisdiction, it also can do for others, so that someone is not trying to do it over and over and over again. Each enterprise is not trying to do it over and over and over again. There can be some clarity in goal setting with other departments, having to commit to subcontractors at the time of bid can also help reduce the inequities, monitoring the contract as long as it is active, and prompt payment to subcontractors is part of it, and then repercussions for when things don't happen, as well as having requirements for built-in capacity, being able to redefine master contracts and maybe unbundle them a little bit, make them a bit smaller so that smaller groups can apply for them. And then being proactive with the training and the teaming process and the networking process. And so all of these are things that we're going to explore more and more as we get into our specific examples. And we're going to start off our specific examples with Seattle. And I have the pleasure of introducing Nancy Locke. Nancy is the Director of Seattle City Purchasing and Contracting Services. She has been with the city in various capacities over a number of years, and she has also served as the Deputy Director for the State of Washington General Services. The City of Seattle holds a strongly shared mission to deliver socially responsible contracts, and Nancy's office manages all city bids and contracts for construction work, services, and products, and leads the city minority business initiatives with strong support from her mayor, city council, city attorney, and all the champions in all city departments. And she has received numerous awards recognizing her work in social equity and WMBE contracting. Nancy, I believe you're unmuted. Is that true?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
Great. And then if you give me just one moment, I am going to give you control of the computer. And now you should have control of the computer, so you should be able to move the slides forward.
Great, thank you very much. To set some context for you, we have what is I-200, Initiative 200, which was passed shortly after Prop 209 here in Washington State, and it's almost identical wording. The I-200, Initiative 200, was promoted by Ward Connolly, who is the same advocate who began the work on Prop 209 down in California. So we are working under very similar constraints that are those that California and Michigan also have. I also want to note that every jurisdiction is different. And so although Prop 209 and Initiative 200, which are both statewide impacts on how we do our work, are very meaningful and set a very high bar for us to try and overcome, every public agency has their own legal risk and their own legal advisors and your own court cases that may guide you in what is possible and is not possible. So the things that we do here in the city of Seattle may be very different than those that another agency in Washington State or somewhere else could successfully implement. To give you just some context, this is our utilization rates as they currently exist. We're, as you can see, somewhere about 12% for products, ranging to 20% for consultant work. And our public works projects, once they're all done and completed, have yielded us about 14% year-to-date in 2016 and 19% of our total spend in 2015. We count self-identified firms and state-certified firms. Our state is a little different. Our state law is a little different than that in California and other places. Our state law says that we cannot share a certification with anyone else. In other words, we cannot use the Minority Supplier Development Council certification, anyone else's certification. The only certification we are legally allowed to recognize is that which goes through our State of Washington DBE office. That said, the city has made a policy decision to also recognize self-identified companies. That means those owners who say, I'm a woman or I'm a minority and I own at least 51% of the business. and they are able to go in, check a box, and say, this is who I am, without going through a certification process. This is not without controversy. There are those who believe that we should be only limiting ourselves to state certified, but by and large, our principles and our race and social justice ethics tell us that self-identified is a very appropriate way for us to recognize firms. And some of the reasons behind that are that we are a sanctuary city, and we do not ask, nor legally can we ask someone to identify anything that reveals their citizenship. The state certification, i.e. federal DBE certification, requires things like birth certificates and citizenship documents. And so from that perspective, we needed a place and wanted a place where one did not need to reveal their citizenship in order for us to recognize that they are minority-owned. The other issue is that after I-200, our companies, the certification process tanked. And we went from probably 5,000 firms recognized in the state as being WIMBY-owned down to almost 1,000. So right now, if you just looked at state certified firms, you'd only see about 1,000 of them. The reasons are because it is so intrusive. One needs to reveal not only their citizenship status, but their bank accounts, their home mortgage, and it's a very laborious process and very intrusive process, and companies are not inclined to feel that they get a return for that investment unless they have federal funding. This gives you a chart over time. So what you'll see at the beginning there is the tanking that occurred after I-200, and it took a couple of years for the contracts to expire and wind themselves out. But you can see, starting in 2002, 2003, the bottom dropped out on WIMBY utilization here in the city of Seattle, and it quite frankly did that across the state. So all of our jurisdictions here in Washington experienced a similar drop. It just, the state of Washington is at 0%. The University of Washington is at 0% utilization. Happened almost immediately, and it remains today at those 0% marks. Most of our local agencies don't even bother to track it because they believe it's a violation of I-200, or they believe it's a risk that they don't want to incur. We have not had any issues in that with the city of Seattle, and we believe in order to be important, you have to measure it. You will see a fairly steady increase over the past some years. And since 2005, when we really took over this program, we began to operate by a different set of guiding principles than our forebears did. And you'll see, you start seeing it translating into significant increases in utilization. We're not there yet. So as you can see here, our population by our census data in 2010 is close to 30% for minority populations. I prefer to use the term people of color, and when I use the term people of color, I am also meaning the full spectrum of race ethnic groups, but I use it somewhat interchangeably with minority. So our people of color population hits close to 30%. The census from 2010 tells us that they are about 17% of the businesses owned in this region. Our city construction spend suggests to us that we are near, if not surpassing, the share of money going to minority firms compared to their share of businesses. Same with our city consultant spend. However, we're not done yet, and until we see diversity at the level that our minority or people of color population are, we're probably not going to consider ourselves done. We have not done a disparity study, and we are advised that at this point in time, we're probably not going to do ourselves a favor by doing a disparity study. If we were ever challenged, that is the time for us to probably step up and say it's time to collect that kind of data. But we have not been challenged on our program. We also have some sister agencies, including the state, who have done disparity studies that can help us rely upon, that we can rely upon if needed. If we get challenged, we can refer to their results. So I think I've lost control of the mouse. And if our moderator could just give me access to it.
Hi, Nancy. I think that you do have access to it. Maybe click on the, just click on your screen and then see. Oh, there you go.
There we go. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So thank you. So we have some basic principles, and they really go down to some of the remarks that were made earlier. I believe this is all about courage. It is the courage of every one of you on this phone call that is the most important thing in making these changes. Nothing else you do is more important than the courage you use to make change happen. We all have somewhat similar programs, somewhat similar environments. The difference here is how creative, how innovative we can be, and how much courage we're willing as agencies and as individuals to work from. How much risk are we willing to absorb? I've absorbed a lot of risk and making decisions and stepping forward on policies that are not popular. And I'm sure all of you have done likewise, because that's how we make change in our organizations. In addition to us as individuals, our organization as a city has done some policy and principles that have helped us. One is we made a very conscious decision that we are not going to allow a collapse as a result of I-200. The other one is that we do not focus on small business. We focus only on women and minority business. We do not have a small business program. And the reason we do not have a program that is local business. We do not have a program that is focused on capacity building. We don't care if a WIMBY is large or small. What we care about is that they are allowed equal successful access and use, and that they feel comfortable when they work with us. And I'll talk more about what that means. We have kind of a race and social justice principle that says, for example, if you're an African American, if you're black, you have a different history here than any other small business in America. And we need to recognize and respect that, and the tools and approach we use is going to be different than we might use for another white male-owned business. So that is part of the principles around why we are only a WIMBY-focused city. That gives us additional challenge, because we cannot then step aside and say, well, it's for small businesses, so I-200 is no longer applicable. The final reason we look at that WIMBY focus is that we have found in some of our environments, when we are working with all small business, in the low bid environment, our WIMBYs still do not succeed. Our small businesses, when they're competing against each other in a low bid environment, the white male businesses are the ones who succeed. And so we have been reluctant to create that kind of marketplace in our low bid construction environment. The other thing is we, as a policy from I've worked under 5 mayors. Every mayor and every city council has said, we are willing to take a lot of risk in this, and we will have your back. So you can take risk, we will be behind you. That has been overwhelming. One of the biggest differences in our work compared to what my colleagues elsewhere in our state may have for them. The final difference that we have is that our WIMBY program is centralized in my office, which awards, executes, and manages all the city contracts So I execute the public works contracts for the city as well as procurement, and we manage all the policies around consultants. That makes our office very powerful in enacting and interpreting what we want to have happen with WIMBY inside contracts. Okay. And I will figure out how to, there we go. So we have two examples that I'm going to touch on today that may be things that you can take back with you. One is an inclusion plan, and the other one is what we've done with cash flow issues. So our inclusion plan, these are both focused on how do we make our environment work well for WIMBY firms who come and try and work in the city. Our percentages, we're no longer churning to try and get them in the city business. We're trying to say, when you are here, what does it feel like as you're working for primes or for the city? One of our key issues was swap outs. So we would have primes who promised us, yes, we are trying good faith efforts. Yes, we think we're going to use this WIMBY firm. In fact, we'll give you a list of 20 WIMBY firms that we have called, and they're interested in doing work on this contract. So if you award the contract to us, one of them, is going to be great, and we will work with them, and you can award us the contract and feel confident. Well, what would happen is our WIMBYs came in large numbers to say, hey, all they're doing is asking for my name and phone number to put on a list to hand to you. They're not even bothering to have me bid. Or they promised they would give me the work. They told you as a city they would give me work, but as soon as you executed your contract, they walked away from the deal. So what we wanted through our inclusion plan was to say, you're not going to do that anymore, primes. If you want to do business with us, you need to make an honest commitment to use the WIMBYs that you are telling us you're talking with. So what we did was create a 2-page document that says, tell us your good faith efforts. You're going to volunteer your good faith efforts. We are legally under I-200 still eligible to ask you and demand of you good faith efforts. We just can't tell you what those are going to be. That's your job. So tell us and volunteer to us how you want us to measure good faith efforts on your part. And in fact, so that we don't get swap outs and so that we know that those good faith efforts are being done and volunteered to us also in good faith, we're going to quantify them. And if you want to bid, you need to give us a quantifiable measure of what you call to be good faith. This did not increase our WIMBY utilization, but it stabilized it, and it created a better environment for our WIMBY firms. It's basically a 2-page promise sheet that they give us when they bid. They will tell us what are they going to do for their good faith efforts. They will give us either a goal that's greater than we've seen in the past for that type of work, and or they can guarantee to use particular WIMBY firms, and or they can agree to certain cash flow. They can balance among those three. The more aggressive the goal, the more points they get, the higher the grade they get, and if they pass, then their bid is responsive and they can go into our low bid award calculations, or they can get scored points in our request for proposal process. These are contractually binding. They're binding. They are breach of contract if they do not accomplish the goals that they told us were possible if they used good faith efforts. And we have a number of enforcement mechanisms that we use, including withholding invoice payments and the threat of debarment. Withholding invoice payments, we have rejected a number of bids because when they came in, their good faith efforts didn't add up to be enough to pass the test. We have never been challenged. We have never even received a protest. Our theory is that contractually they must protest before they can sue us. So we have a way of managing the risk if someone wanted to sue us to object to this. But we have never even had a protest at this point. We have withheld invoices as well. It's rare, but we have when they are not giving us the data that we need, when they are not reporting to us, or when they're not showing the progress to attain their good faith promise. We withheld a $10 million invoice on our major seawall construction project for those reasons, and within 2 days, they stepped up and solved the problem. So it is a very effective enforcement tool. The second and final thing I will talk through is cash flow issues. And as also mentioned earlier in the discussion, cash flow is a problem for our companies, our WIMBY firms, especially our smallest firms. And in the way traditional payment processes work, all of our contracts probably read the same way. They probably all say, once the owner, you as a city or you as a public agency, pay the prime, then the prime must turn around and pay their sub. Well, the problem with that is it puts our sub at the bottom of the list. They are the last ones paid, but they're the ones who need the money the most. So what we have said is, by contract, we have introduced in every one of our contracts the requirement that our primes must pay subs within 30 days of an invoice, even if the city hasn't paid them. AGC was furious. We had op-ed articles. It is not popular among our larger firms. However, we stuck to our guns. Again, that kind of courage issue comes into play. We stuck with our guns. We had a mayor who supported it, and we said, we're standing by this. So now we are measuring and guaranteeing to our smallest firms they get first payment. They will be paid first, and we will enforce it, and we will use our contract remedies and breach of contract to enforce that. We, in turn, there are WIMBYs who may be primes. It's not often, but they may be. And we as a city feel like we also ethically owe it to our prime contractors to make sure we pay them promptly as well. So we have a two-tier initiative. One is city departments, you better step up and pay your primes quickly. Get it out the bottom of your inbox and get it processed. primes, you must pay your subs, even if we haven't paid you. We also have worked and accepted some risk. We require our primes to release retainage held on construction jobs as soon as the sub is done with their component of the work. We are now requiring in all of our construction contracts that pre-mobilization pay shall be given by the prime to a sub to help them pre-mobilize and give them cash flow up front, just like we might do to a prime as part of a construction project. And finally, a big one is dispute resolution. How do we create a power dynamic that allows the WIMBY to have an argument with the prime and have some power in that argument? And so we have said, we won't close the contract, we won't pay you if you have a dispute standing out there with a WIMBY firm, or for that matter, any firm. So you need to solve those and get mutual agreement. That gives our WIMBYs a lot more power in their dispute process to assure that they're being treated fairly when they have a legitimate dispute on a project. So those are my two examples, and I think we're holding questions till the end of the seminar, but thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nancy. We are going to hold questions to the end of the seminar, but if people have burning questions, they can begin to queue up by putting them in the chat. And Nancy, I am going to try to take back control of the computer, and next up will be Velma. Velma, are you unmuted? Can you speak?
I'm here.
Great, excellent. I'm excited about that. And Velma, if you give me 2 seconds, I will attempt to give you control so that you can control the keyboard and mouse. And you should have control now, and I'm going to give you a little introduction. So Velma Corbell is the director of the Minneapolis Department of Civil Rights. She's widely respected for her work in the equal opportunity community with over 25 years of experience in advancing civil rights. Velma previously served both as the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Human Rights and the Director of Diversity and Equal Opportunity for the Metropolitan Council. She has served on several nonprofit boards of directors, including Family Promise in Anoka County, Achieve Minneapolis, Minnesota Women's Economic Roundtable, and the YWCA Minneapolis. Velma is a member of the Minnesota Advisory Committee to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission and a veteran of the United States Navy. And we're thrilled that she's here to share her experience with us. Velma, it's all you.
Thank you, Crystal. And also thank you, Nancy. That was a really great overview from both of you. I am just honored to be on the phone with you today. I wish I could see the room. But I wish you were all in a room so that I could see the room. I'm going to spend today talking about 2 initiatives in Minneapolis and in the region. And I'm going to go through it really quickly because I think there will be a lot of good questions at the end of the session. And I want to get to those because I'm sure you have them. But the two things I want to talk about are the Best Practices Roundtable and the Minneapolis Target Market Program. But before I jump into them, let me just do a little bit of level setting with you about the region that we're talking about here in Minnesota. In the Minneapolis Twin Cities area, there are multiple jurisdictions. There are 2 major urban cores. The Twin Cities consist of Minneapolis and all of its suburbs, and then the city of St. Paul and the suburbs around St. Paul. the Mississippi River divides the Twin Cities. There are 9 counties in the metropolitan statistical area. There are 3 regional agencies, the Metropolitan Council, the Metropolitan Airports Commission, and a Sports Facilities Authority. There are multiple municipalities within those counties that have programs that they run for inclusion. So you can imagine that it can be quite a soup of things that a woman or minority-owned firm has to contend with if they want to do business with any of us in the metropolitan area. So that's a little bit about the geography. So also now you also have to think that within each of those jurisdictions that I just mentioned, there are very small departments that do the inclusion work. I would suspect that the Department of Transportation and probably the Metropolitan Council as a regional agency have the largest inclusion staffs of anybody in the metropolitan region, and they are not breaking records with the numbers of people that they have doing the work. So sometimes when you are doing the work, and you all know this because not everybody on the phone is from Portland or Seattle or from an LA, so some of you are from smaller jurisdictions where oftentimes you are departments or divisions of maybe 1, 2, or 3 people. Sometimes that can feel like you're a voice out in the wilderness. It's also sometimes problematic if you are 1 or 2 or 3 people and one of you leaves for whatever reason. You lose a lot of that institutional knowledge, the institutional history, and oftentimes you might lose your champion. And so one of the things that we've done in talking about this first activity here, the Best Practices Roundtable, is to try to do something that would mitigate all of those issues that I just talked about. Now, when Crystal sent out the emails a couple of months ago, she gave us 4 broad categories that she wanted us to talk about with you today. And the 4 categories were what was the problem that we were trying to solve by this practice or initiative, what were the goals or the outcomes, what sorts of accountabilities or measures of success, what would that look like, and then she wanted us to talk a little bit about what sorts of lessons we learned or what sorts of hoops we had to jump through or hurdles we had to overcome. I'm going to talk specifically about that with these 2 items, and then I'm sure there'll be more discussion at the end of the session. We can talk in some generalities. But first, let me talk about the round table. As I talked about, within the Twin Cities metropolitan area, there are 14 different jurisdictions that I could readily identify. Each of those different jurisdictions have different sets of rules by which they operate in order to bring about equity and inclusion of minority and women-owned firms. Although each of those jurisdictions has a stated similar value for equity and inclusion, it often gets played out very differently, and depending on who you have either leading your organization or leading the entity that's directly responsible for the operation, there could be differing levels of support for the work that needs to happen to create that equity and inclusion. The other thing that I talked about was there's massive turnover. If you all know this, that there is a transition happening right now in the workforce where those of us like me who have been doing this work for a few decades, we are starting to see the horizon or the sunset, and we're preparing for that next phase of our journey. And so there's a whole different body of professionals that are coming in behind us that may not have the same sort of history, perspective about this work. And so there's a need to keep bringing people along and bringing them up to speed with regard to the equity and inclusion work. So the Best Practices Roundtable was really set up to be this regional collaborative of all of these different agencies that you see on the screen. So MnDOT, the Human Rights Department, the Department of Administration, all of these people have equity and inclusion programs to some extent. The other thing that I'd like to point out is that we looked at equity and inclusion for both workforce inclusion and also for equity and contracting inclusion. And within our equity and contracting, we looked at a lot of the things that Nancy talked about in her component of the presentation. We looked at certification. We had to look at business technical assistance and reporting options. We had to look at different procurement methods. We looked at good faith efforts. We looked at business development, workforce collaborations. But for the relevancy of this particular topic, we're talking about contracting right now. In the Twin Cities metropolitan area, most jurisdictions have a race and gender-based program that looks at larger purchases in construction and development, those large infrastructure bills, whether they're building buildings or roads or whatever it is. So that race and gender program, for most people, is fairly well developed. But the issue here is that with all of these jurisdictions, we work, unlike what Nancy talked about, we work from a certification model where businesses that want to do business with any of these jurisdictions have to be certified as a small business, so on size and social disadvantage. But the reality is, for these larger infrastructure bills, there's only about 1,200 companies that are available to all of us to do this work. So if we thought if we're all drawing from the same workforce, we're all drawing from the same universe of contractors, it just makes sense for us as regional practitioners to get together to fulfill the goals. And the goals were to share our knowledge and information, to build our own capacity as practitioners, but also to improve the processes, do some standardization, do some work that makes it more efficient, not just for the practitioners, but also makes it more accessible to those 1,200 businesses that we want to do business with. In terms of the success of the roundtable and what does that look like, this is an initiative that's been ongoing in the region now for about 2 years. And so success for the practitioners is, are people still engaged? Are they still committed to making life easier for ourselves, but also to make the process of doing business with us easier for the businesses? And I'm happy to say that people are still engaged, and I'll talk to you about an example here in a little bit. The other piece is, are we doing work that makes life easier for the businesses that want to do business with us? And we believe we are. One of the successes also from the Best Practices Roundtable was the creation of a best practices guidebook. And I mentioned that there's turnover, people leaving, things changing. One of the things that we wanted to do was to document in some form, when looking at all of these different categories of work, can we put a guidebook together that if someone comes in who's new to this work, we can hand this off to them and they can read it, and it would give them some grounding in the key areas of work that have to happen in order to bring about equity and inclusion. And so I put the URL on the screen for folks who might be interested in seeing what's in the guidebook. The other thing in terms of a measure of success, and I mentioned whether or not people continue to be engaged, one of the things that we put together out of the roundtable is a business resource matrix. And it is a web-based tool for to provide technical assistance to our small business community. And what it does is, there's just a little bit of a screenshot here on the screen, but one of the things that we know across jurisdictions is that we don't have the right amount of resources or the fullest amount of resources that we'd like to have in order to provide everything to every business that wants to do business with each one of our jurisdictions. And so what we've put together is a business resource matrix, and what it does is a business no matter what stage it's in, whether it's a startup, existing, new business, expanding business, can go on this website, identify which type of business it is, identify under resource what it is interested in learning more about, if it's contracting opportunities, if it's certification, if it's a business loan, if it's business licensing. That resource column, there's a pull-down menu there where they can click on what they're interested in, and in the agency column, it will give them a list of resources in every agency that they can tap into that is there for them to make life easier for them. So this is a business resource matrix. So here's a caution if anybody is thinking about doing something like this, and that is, as government entities, which I'm pretty sure 85% of the people on the call probably are, we oftentimes think that once we put it up on the website or put it up on social media, that it is out there and a beacon of light is shining on it and it's all good. But what we've learned in Minneapolis is that's not how it happens here. It makes us feel good to put something up on a website and put it up on social media, but the reality is the businesses, especially the small women and minority-owned firms that we're trying to provide a better service to, don't have time to sit and surf social media, don't have time to open up all their emails every day, don't have time to go in and play around on a website. So we also have to figure out how to directly communicate with the people we believe that are interested in. And so U.S. mail, phone calls, text messages, web apps, thinking creatively about how to approach and engage with every one of these businesses is a good thing. The City of Minneapolis also has a business technical assistance program where we contract with 13 different resource organizations within Minneapolis that have as their clients these businesses that we're trying to engage. And so that those resources that are under contract help us reach out to these various businesses. So that's a quick overview about the Best Practices Roundtable, because I'll sum this up by saying this. No matter how much of an advocate you are and how much of a champion you are, you cannot do the work by yourself. And as I'm hearing Crystal and Nancy talk about Prop 209 and the challenges with being creative and managing the risk associated with inclusion where you are, you have to have a cohort of people. And not everybody that you're going to need to work with is in GARE. So there has to be an intentional outreach to engage folks like you who are interested in doing this. So the next thing I'll talk about is a strategy that we've employed in the City of Minneapolis to do this. The City of Minneapolis for the last 26 years has had a small and underutilized business program, which is a discrete race and gender-based program where the city can set goals for participation on its contracting. And by saying that, you probably with 26 years, that's fabulous. You're probably making all kind of inroads. But the reality is that it's only been for about the last 5 or 6 years that we have been intentional about really reaching out and taking a deeper dive into what is out there so that we can do better with providing access to procurement and contracting opportunities for the small business community doing business with Minneapolis. I can tell you that this small and underutilized business program is really about the larger construction and development projects. And we have a 25%, and I'm putting this word in quotes, aspirational goal for inclusion of women and minority firms, about 12% minority, 13% women. You add them up as 25. And we track routinely at about 18 or 19%. So one of the reasons for that is that there's a whole segment of our contracting community that want to do business with the city that we never actually intentionally reached out to, and those are the contractors that provide goods and services to the city. We had never, even in a race and gender neutral way, or either in a race and gender specific way, tried to provide access to the businesses that provide goods and services. So the Target Market Program is really the first opportunity in the city of Minneapolis to do that. What the goal of the program is to allow greater access to qualified small businesses so that they can bid for these smaller dollar contracts without competing head-to-head with larger, more established contractors for goods and services. And this is a race and gender neutral program. The other difference in this, and Nancy mentioned this in her part of the discussion, certification for our race and gender-based programs, because you know about all the lawsuits and the case law that dictates it, is very laborious. The Target Market Program, which is the city's race and gender neutral program, is not that laborious. As a matter of fact, the only thing that the city is asking for companies that want to participate in this program is that they have to submit an affidavit. Now, you know, your head probably just exploded when I said that, but we're gonna test that and see how well it works. The problem or the hurdle, lesson learned from this is one of the things that people, I think, are becoming in tune with in Minneapolis, and if you think about your own organization, it's the same things that people are only now starting to get, that they have implicit biases. And if you look at the people in your organization who are in positions of leadership to be making, or in management positions, the ones that are making the buying decisions in your organization, no matter how diverse your community is, I would wager that the people in leadership positions probably don't look like the rest of your community. So people are making purchasing decisions based on their implicit bias. I didn't call anybody a racist, so I don't want the recording to sound like that, but one of the things that we have to learn in Minneapolis is that inequities in purchasing and contracting are a real thing. And we have contributed to that as individual requesters of goods and services. And the other thing is that we have to be able to tell the story about why we are broadening our supplier diversity program in the city, and that is through providing proof to people that the disparities exist and that there are businesses out there that want to do business with us. And so I talked about this. This is what I have. My mouth gets so far ahead of me. One of the things that we are doing that I think Nancy said they're not doing in Seattle is we are doing a disparity study in the city of Minneapolis, along with most of the other jurisdictions that I mentioned in the region, because we do want to know who's out there in our demographic who is ready, willing, and able to do business with us. And happy to share the outcomes of that if anybody is interested. And we are always looking for creating good policies, either through our statutes, through our ordinances, because the reality is that everything starts with a policy, whether your policy is an executive order or a lawsuit. There's something there that you have to adhere to. So I'm going to stop there and then just wait for questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Velma. We're going to move on. I am going to first, Velma, I am going to take back control of the computer, and I am going to give control to Wanda. And Wanda, I believe that you are unmuted. I believe that you can speak. Could you just say hello for me so I can test that out?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone.
Great, great, great. And I believe that you also have control of the slides. Could you play around with it for a second so we can test it out before I introduce you? It looks like that is yes, it looks like you are controlling it.
Yes.
Beautiful. Great. And so it's my pleasure to next introduce Wanda Kirkpatrick. And she's been heading up for over the past 10 years the Department of the Office of Equal Opportunity. And when she says when she took the job, the Metropolitan Council was well on its way to having inclusion, diversity, affirmative action, and equal opportunity be a part of everything they did. And when she started as the position of director, it went even further to build up their disadvantaged business enterprises programs, their DBEs, upholding its express commitment to level the playing field for existing and prospective DBEs, as well as safeguarding fair access to contract funding for companies at large, is a job that she and her department sees to and ensures that the Metropolitan Council takes seriously. Inclusion for her is not just a buzzword. As she attests, she truly and their department truly believes it. All right. Thank you, Wanda. And you can begin.
You're welcome. All right, everyone. We have been sitting here and we've heard three wonderful women talk about the work that they've done. So what I'd like for you to do first is just roll your head around and get ready. It's time to now talk about the Metropolitan Council's underutilized business. Wake up, everyone. I know those three women had very, very exciting things to say to you, so I know you're ready for just one more. So here we go. Let's talk about this. Here in the state of Minnesota, oh, by the way, I must mention to you that one who spoke just before me, Velma Corbel, Velma is my mentor. As it said in her bio, she used to be the job that I have. And so I learned a great deal from her. And all of those things she talked about, she instilled within me. So one of the things that we wanted to do at the Metropolitan Council was have a program that said, wait a minute, we're doing a whole lot for our federal dollars, but what are we doing for our dollars that aren't federal, for the local and state dollars? And so that's where we came up with our MCUB program. So in 2012, we needed to expand to do something to make sure that the millions of dollars that we were using that were not federal dollars that the DBE program had some type of goal on it. Our governor here in the state of Minnesota said that he wanted to make sure that there was an increase in contracting opportunities for minorities, for women, and for veteran-owned businesses. And he said, I don't want something that happens in a long time. I want it to happen right now. And he said that we need to make sure that it follows all the rules and regulations, but let's get on it. And so we developed something called our MCUB program. You know, we're government, so we always have to have some of those acronyms, and so that was the acronym that we came up with. So the MCUB program assigns narrowly tailoring subcontracting goals. It was mirrored after the DBE program, but had a little bit of more flexibility than the DBE program does. One of the things that surprises me about the state of Washington in their program is the fact that they can have folks just say that they're women and minority owned. Here in the state of Minnesota, we constantly have folks who are not women and minority-owned programs who say that they are, and even going through the stringent DBE program and through our MCUB program, we're still finding people who are saying, I want to have my wife be the owner of this company. What do I need to do? And so that is one of the reasons why we have not gone to the program like they have out in Seattle. And the program that Velma just talked about, as a matter of fact, while she was online, I asked our folks to get someone over and tell us about that targeted group business that she has. So here we go with our MCUB program. So we said that we wanted to have an eligibility pool of who's going to be in that. And we needed to make sure that we had all of the folks that the governor wanted us to do. So we took the TGB program, the targeted group program that is from the state, and our state also has an ED program, and that program includes white male businesses also. And so we carve out that part of their program. We also include the veteran-owned businesses, and that the veteran-owned businesses, as you probably know, get certified by the feds. However, here in the state of Minnesota, our state folks also certify veteran-owned businesses. They do have to continue to get that certification from the feds, but they can be and are part of the state's veteran-owned business program. And then, of course, we have our DBEs, the folks who are part of the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program through USDOT. Now, so you might want to say, well, Wanda, that sounds like a lot of firms, 1,700 firms. It's not really a lot of firms, but it's enough firms that we know that the work that we do at the Metropolitan Council can be supported through these 1,700 folks. So we recognize several of the certifications in our community, and we make sure that we know for sure that those communities have a way to really vet the people who are in the program. I want to tell you that when here in the state of Minnesota, I have been to the legislature at least 5 or 6 times in my tenure here to go up and talk with legislators who want to say we need to do something different with the Metropolitan Council's programs, because we've had people who have said that they are definitely women, but we have said that they don't own the business. They're not in control of the business. And as a matter of fact, when questioned about the business, they have to have someone else there to say something about the business, because they are just not as qualified to speak about the business. So I've had to go up to the legislature to say, no, sir, here are the facts of what we have found, because we're very stringent on making sure that our programs can be defended. And yes, it is very difficult when someone comes and says, we're going to sue you because of this, and we shake in our boots, but we can stand behind our program because we know that the folks in our programs have been vetted. And that's what we needed from our MCUB program. Let's see now if I can change. So when we started with the MCUB program, of course we started with a subcontracting effort, as I said before. And in 2012, we had 3 contracts that we used our MCUB program with. Then, as you can see on the screen, we had from 3 to 53 in 2016. Now, you might all again say, that's not very many, but actually for us it is. Remember that this is a new program. It is not something like the USDOT program that has been going on for years. This is a brand new program. So you see those years between 2012 and 2016. What are the kinds of things that we had to do? Well, we had to inform all of the people that we have on our MCUB list that they are now on our MCUB list. We had to internally do some training of our buyers, of our project managers, to say, there is a new program in town, everyone, and we would like for you to be a part of it. And we had to do a great deal in those few years of, how shall I say it? I think it's more like getting to know those folks internally so that when there was a problem, immediately we could take care of it. And they knew right away. I think that's called relationship building. And so that's another thing that we had to do, is that relationship building internally. And then externally, what we had to do for our prime contractors is make sure, absolute sure, that our prime contractors knew what was going on. A lot of them already bid to us through our DBE program, so they knew how this was going to work. But some of them did not, and we had to do a lot of training on the external side too. And that's why it's taken so long from 2012 to 2016 to get to 53 contracts. However, we see in the near future that that's going to be going up to over 100 contracts, because we do have a lot of funding that we get directly from the state and directly from other opportunities within the community. So what does that mean as far as dollars is concerned? Well, where we started in 2012 with $0 to MCUB participants, we have gotten now in 2015, because we don't have all of the data from 2016, to $5 million, $5.5 million to be exact, to people within our MCUB directory. Lots of money there, from zero, from us having contracts that didn't have any goals on them at all, to having goals on them and providing to our MCUB participants $5.5 million. That's dollars in our community that is making a difference. So can you start a new program today? Absolutely. You just have to know how to get started. And if you need anything, by all means, you will see on this next slide, I believe, my information. And I would be happy to work with you and tell you all of the things that we did to start our MCUB program from $0 to $5.5 million. Thank you very much for your for your attention, and I hope that we can answer any of your questions that you might have on what we need.
Great. Thank you, Wanda, and thank you also for that reminder for all of us to breathe and move around. We're entering into the final stage, and so now is a good time for us to stretch a bit and to think, and for also you to get in your questions. So if you have burning questions, please write them in the comment box. It's a little box with I guess like a thought bubble. I don't even know what that graphic is called. Where you can get us your comments if you have questions. And we'll begin now with just, I thought it'd be good just to have all of our presenters, both Nancy, Locke from Seattle and Velma Corbell from Minneapolis and Wanda Kirkpatrick from St. Paul, to just think about and answer kind of, I posed 3 questions, kind of like if I knew then when we were beginning what I know now, I would have, and just to have them share their reflections. I believe that Nancy, Wanda, and Velma, I believe you are all unmuted.
Yes.
So you can begin. Good. Whoever would like to begin, or do you want me to call?
Sure. It's probably better just call.
But that was Velma, so by saying that,
okay.
you
So
get called
that's what I
go.
get for talking first. Okay. So here's
That's
what
right.
here's what I wish I knew then what I know now, and that is the benefit of having allies to do this work. You know, I'm a doer just by nature, and I always I see something, or I get some work direction, or have an idea, and I just want to jump in and get going and get moving. And one of the things that I've learned after having done this work now for about the last 20 or so years, probably more than that, but I'm not going to tell you how many more, but one of the things that I've learned is that I have a tendency to get too far out in front of people because I'm so anxious to make the changes that need to be made that oftentimes it ends up being seeing people way far back in the rearview mirror, and it can be frustrating, and it can be energy draining. So what I've learned is not to get too far out in front of people, bring people along with a little nudge here, a little nudge there. And the other thing that I've learned, you know, in building those allies is there's a lot of help in the community. Even, you know, hearing Nancy and Crystal and Wanda talk about the work that they're doing in their respective jurisdictions, there are a lot of good ideas in the community because people will tell you what they need. If they tell you one time and you make some legitimate attempts to listen and respond to that, they will become your allies. If they tell you one time, you don't do it, they tell you twice and you don't do it the second time, they're probably going to disengage. And so what I've learned is I need those allies, and I really need to listen for the solutions that exist in the community.
Great. Thank you, Velma. Maybe Nancy, if you...
Sure. I really appreciate what Velma said. I would just echo that completely. The community, and interestingly, here everyone's community is different, but here in Seattle we have advocates who will be disruptive on a job site or in a council meeting, and I love them for that. And so because they help us create a sense of urgency that we alone cannot do, but they will also, if I work with them closely, they trust us, that tool becomes part of my toolbox as much as it is their toolbox, because we really are partners in trying to make this all come together and make a difference. I think building trust is an interesting one. It's hard to build trust without doing something meaningful that really makes a difference person by person. So, like, I have a lot of staff working on these kinds of issues when they're taking a contract out or whatever, and they're supposed to be interacting with these folks. But in order for WIMBY folks to have confidence, those staff not only need to use the words, but they need to be willing to do something that's out of the box to help someone. Once our community starts seeing that, they built a lot of trust. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. Wanda, do you have something to share on that next question before I go to one of the questions posed by the audience?
I do. And this might be interesting to you. If what I know now, I wish I'd have known then, and it might sound funny, but bring treats to things. Now, you might laugh and say, oh, my goodness, what does she mean by that? When I learned that once when we had a community meeting, we thought that it was going to be just like one of our staff meetings, like a Met Council meeting, where I would provide the speaking, and we would bring our top-down stuff and all of that. But what I didn't do was build that relationship before that meeting, which is so important. Both Velma and Nancy talked about trust, and I want to talk a little bit about building that relationship. If I would have built that relationship, I'd have known that in their community, in the community that I was working with, one of the things that they do is break bread together. Break bread together. How's that? And at their meetings, because that symbolized for them that everyone was on the same level, that everyone was there to talk about things, and I didn't know that. I didn't take the time to find those kinds of things out. And now I know that, and now I always bring treats, but that is one of the things that we have to understand is what is it that our community wants and needs from us before we go in and try to tell them what they need. That's what I wish I would have known then.
Thank you. Thank you. Lucas has a question, and it might go out to you all. It might go out to I don't know exactly who's on the line, so it might go out to everybody else on the line as well. But Lucas says, there is power in peer-to-peer conversations. Are there city managers and mayors who could speak to their experience and success in equity in contracting? And I don't know if you all have experience in talking about building those relationships with your city managers and mayors as well, or if anybody, if you are a city manager or a mayor and are on the line, you should feel free to write something in the chat box, and then we'll be able to unmute you and enable you to also speak on this topic.
Crystal, let me just jump in real fast. And this is Thelma again. One of the reasons, I know this is a GARE event. I think any of the folks who are part of the Government Alliance for Race and Equity are part of this cohort of government entities that have as a menu of activities and strategies to build those peer-to-peer relationships. And one of the things that Julie Nelson, who is the coordinator of GARE, has identified and has actually created some tools on the GARE website, I think, that identifies people in these different disciplines across the cohort, so that if you are in Richmond, California, in their city attorney's office or in their public works department, you know who your counterpart is. And one of the things that we do when we sign on to GARE is that we put out there that our jurisdiction is willing and happy to have those conversations. I think that's one of the tenets of the cohort, is to be willing to have a peer-to-peer conversation like that. So I think that network exists and is always being expanded.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know if there are any other burning questions or any questions, but if you have questions, definitely put them in in the chat box. We've already kind of begun to talk about a little bit about working with and working with leadership, staff, and community, and developing commitment and managing expectations. I don't know if there's anything else as we're waiting for people to put in their questions. Are there pieces about that or pieces about the race-neutral concerns and strategies that you would like to bring forth? I'm going to call on you first again, Velma, just because.
Oh.
Would you like me to call on somebody else?
I'll jump in. I want to talk about a little bit about developing commitment and managing the expectations of leadership, because I'm looking at this little collaboration model here on the screen with all the green and blue and pink people, and the reality is that if you work in a jurisdiction where your leader or your leaders or your advocates and champions, you are blessed, because what they're going to do is they're going to work with you to put accountability metrics in place, and they will push those down through the organization so that folks whose job it is to help create equitable outcomes in your jurisdiction will be managed and measured and evaluated on how well they're helping to achieve that. But if you are not fortunate enough to live in and work in a jurisdiction like that, it's going to take a bit more strategic work with your peers or within your work group or within the community. And that's why I keep saying that the community might feel like the bane of your existence a lot of the times, but they can be your biggest ally. Because I guarantee you that in every one of your government jurisdictions, somebody at the top got elected. If they are listening to their constituents, and you've built the relationships in the community that you need to build, and you've built the relationships with your peers, they better hear what's being said to them from folk in the community, because their existence depends on that. But I think managing the expectations, and for me, and I'll say this very quickly, I have a rock star staff. And one of the things that we do in this department, and it's a value of mine, is we don't overpromise people and underdeliver. I had a guy 20 years ago say that to me. I adopted it as a mantra. If you are in the equity and inclusion work, you better walk the talk. You better be in touch with your own implicit bias, build your own capacity, and don't overpromise. It's a really big deal in terms of developing commitment.
Thank you. Wanda, I know that you talked a lot about building relationships with community. Do you have something you wanted to add?
I do want to give just another little thing that we did with our light rail project here. We did something called the Great Minds meeting. And that Great Minds, we had people from the community, people from other agencies, contractors, people within our agency, all like just right on each other, saying all kinds of things that nobody knew was true, but they were saying them anyway. And so what I did was I said, I'm going to sequester you all for a whole day, not for an hour, because, in an hour, what can you get done? And an hour and a half, I sequestered them for the whole day. And the first thing we did, and I know some people don't like these kinds of things, but we did one of those touchy-feely things where we got to know each other. And that was the biggest part of the day, because we found one side, some gentleman who had 12 grandchildren in the community, and another person who was working at an agency who had 13 grandchildren. They got together and talked about their grandchildren. One said, I'm a chef. The other one says, I'm a chef. We had people finding out all kinds of things. And what did that do? That got them to understand that we're all people and we should be talking instead of yelling and screaming at each other. We're all people here. Let's build this relationship. And the rest of the day went wonderfully. Another thing we did was we gave them the rules. Nobody had told the community what the rules were. So when they said, we want to have a 50% goal on this project, everybody on the agency side were like, oh my gosh, and of course the contractors are like, oh my gosh. But what we had to do was we actually taught them how to do the methodology. And they never knew that we didn't just walk out in the backyard and pick it off the tree. And we don't. We have to have a methodology to do goals on our projects that is defendable in court. And they didn't know that. And finally, when they did understand that, that wasn't an issue any longer. We talked to them about what the rules were, and they talked to us about what their wants were. And at the end of the day, the whole day, and yes, I did have treats for them. I even had lunch for them. So yes, we did that, and at the end of the day, we came up with what the barriers were and how together, not separately, but together, we could work on finding ways to get over, around, or just knock those barriers down. And that made the light rail project that we had meet both their goals for contracting and their goals for workforce. And I'll tell you that Great Mind meeting started off with everybody thinking they're coming because they got a great mind. And actually, they did come because they had a great mind. And in the end, we still do Great Mind meetings every time we have a light rail project.
Thank you. Thank you, Wanda. Nancy, do you have?
I don't think I have anything new to add. I think they've said it all very, very well.
Yeah, I have been taking quick notes for myself, and the couple of things that I have really, that I've taken away from today is really what you said, Nancy, about having courage. That has been a word that I've underlined on my piece of paper. And that what you said, Velma, about the power of having allies and building allies and champions in the community as well as throughout our jurisdictions and departments. And definitely what you said, Wanda, about trust and about building those relationships and really coming in and seeing building relationships as one of the priorities. That's been impactful for me. I don't know if we have any last questions. Maybe, Melanie, if we could just send out a chat to everybody once again so that they will see it pop up, and we'll be able to say in any and get a moment before I go into next steps.
Well, I have a question. This is Wanda, and I have a question of Nancy. Nancy, when you go through and your folks come in and say, I am a woman or a minority or own business, is there a way that you I know that when I was in Washington, people did say that, but there was a way that you guys did, if there was a problem, you guys did check some things out. Isn't that correct?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up, Wanda. Yeah, because I know it sounds surprising, and again, there is a little controversy over it. What we have done is we've audited the records. Again, because of state law, we can't go through an entire certification process, but we have audited the records. So we compare the ownership records to those of our Secretary of State to make sure that we can check for gender that way. We have a complaint-driven system also so that we can receive complaints. In our audit work, we found virtually, I think 10 out of like 6,000 records, we found that they claimed to be woman-owned when they were not. And those were not companies that had received business from us, so it didn't have a likely impact on losing work to what I might call real WIMBY firms. We've had 2 complaints come in. The 2 complaints are people who say, I know that person and I can look at them and I know they're white. And so we've done research on those. It turns out that, in fact, they're, as we talk with them, we get proof that they were, in fact, not white, which is the labeling issue that's kind of a race and social justice principle for us, to avoid labeling people just based on what they look like. The other element that makes us a little more comfortable is that our program is largely on outreach and providing people an equitable and fair platform in which they work. So they're not getting price preferences the way that, or set-asides or anything like that, the way that happened pre-I-200. Those tools are gone, so they don't get any direct new preference. And then finally, if it's a federal contract, we must use the state certified firms and that are DBE certified, where those goals become more of a mandatory requirement.
Thank you. Any other questions? Do we have any other questions that people or the presenters wish to bring up?
Crystal, I don't have a question, but I want to go back to the question that Luke asked about the peer-to-peer stuff, and if there's anybody that is interested in talking to their counterpart here in the city of Minneapolis, just shoot me an email, and I'll make sure to get them connected.
Thank you. Thank you, Gama. So we're going to go on to next steps. So we have been recording, and even with the blip, we think that the recording is still happening. In order to get the recording, we'll send you a quick, honest, as Velma was saying, I'm not over-promising or the delivery is a quick survey. It's about 3 minutes if it's long for feedback. And you'll get the links for the recording and the slide presentation. If you're interested in opportunities for support and or follow-up, or you didn't register, you can send me an email. My email is krobinsonjustice@barhi.org, KROBINSONJUSTICE @barhi, BARHII.org. There is an upcoming webinar next week, the week after, October 25th, on applying the racial equity tool. And on November 1st, GARE is also doing their Racial Equity 101, not webinar, but gathering, in-person gathering, and that is a great opportunity if you're new or have people, as we're building our relationships and building our champions, if we have people who we want to encourage to come to that. Okay, so I really want to send a lot of thanks and applause out to Nancy and Velma and Wanda Kirkpatrick, all of their fun, and to thank you so much for sharing all of your experience and strength and hope regarding this. And I will log out. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for being on the Contracting Equity webinar with GARE and BARHII. Bye-bye.